When honest people say what's true, calmly and without embarrassment, they become powerful. At the same time, the liars who've been trying to silence them shrink, and they become weaker. That's the iron law of the universe.
Tucker Carlson has built a career on challenging mainstream narratives and questioning what he calls the deep state, a theoretical, powerful, unelected group manipulating political events and public perception. He has repeatedly argued that a hidden power structure operates behind the scenes. Nixon and the CIA.
Richard Nixon was taken out by the FBI and CIA, and with the help of Bob Woodward, who was a Washington Post reporter who had been a naval intelligence officer working in the White House, working in the Nixon White House. And then he shows up like a year later, and he's this brand new reporter. He'd never been a journalist at all. He's a naval intel officer. The famous Bob Woodward, we all revere. And he's at the Washington Post, and somehow he gets the biggest story in the history of the Washington Post. He's the lead guy in that story. Well, I worked at a newspaper. I've been in the news business my whole life. That is not how it worked.
One of Carlson's more explosive claims involved former President Richard Nixon, whose resignation in 1974 remains one of the most infamous political scandals in history. While Watergate is often cited as the reason Nixon was forced out, Carlson has argued there was a deeper, more sinister motivation at play: Nixon's skepticism of the CIA and his suggestion that the agency was involved in the assassination of JFK. Carlson pointed to a recorded conversation between Nixon and then CIA Director Richard Helms on June 23, 1972. During the discussion, Nixon alluded to knowing, quote, "who shot John," a statement that many interpret as a reference to JFK. Helms's reaction, total silence, was, according to Carlson, revealing. He suggested that Nixon had crossed a line by openly questioning the CIA's potential involvement in one of America's most haunting political assassinations. Carlson's argument hinges on the idea that once Nixon became a threat to the deep state, his downfall was inevitable. He asserted that Bob Woodward, the journalist whose reporting helped bring down Nixon, had deep ties to the intelligence community. The claim that the CIA orchestrated Nixon's resignation remains highly controversial, with historians overwhelmingly attributing his fall to the Watergate scandal. The January 6th false flag theory.
FBI operatives were organizing the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, according to government documents. And those two are not alone. In all, Revolver News reported that there are, quote, upwards of 20 unindicted co-conspirators in the Oath Keeper indictments, all playing various roles in the conspiracy, who have not been charged for virtually the exact same activities, and in some cases, much, much more severe activities, as those named alongside them in the indictments. Huh? So it turns out that this white supremacist insurrection was, again, by the government's own admission in these documents, organized at least in part by government agents.
Carlson has repeatedly challenged the official narrative surrounding the events of January 6, 2021. In a series aired on Tucker Carlson Tonight, he suggested that the storming of the U.S. Capitol was not just a spontaneous riot by Trump supporters, but a deliberate effort by intelligence agencies to entrap them. Much of Carlson's argument rests on the security footage provided to him by House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, which he claimed showed a very different story from what mainstream media had reported. He aired clips of people calmly walking through the Capitol, contrasting this with the violent clashes shown in widely circulated footage. He zeroed in on Jacob Chansley, better known as the QAnon shaman, arguing that Capitol police officers were escorting him through the building rather than treating him as a threat. Beyond his very selective video evidence, Carlson pushed the idea that government operatives may have infiltrated the crowd and played a role in inciting violence. He highlighted the case of Ray Epps, a Trump supporter caught on camera urging people to enter the Capitol, who was never charged. Carlson questioned why Epps was seemingly treated differently from others who participated in the riot. Carlson's theories, of course, have drawn intense criticism, particularly from law enforcement and Capitol police officials who argue that the narrative distorts reality. Even some Republicans, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, have pushed back against Carlson's characterization of January 6 as a peaceful protest. Allegations against the FBI.
In 2017, the FBI secretly began an investigation into whether the president is in fact a Russian agent. The FBI apparently believed that President Trump could be a one-man sleeper cell personally taking direct orders from his handlers in Moscow and working from within the Oval Office to subvert this country. The FBI said they believe that could have happened, so they spied, apparently, on the President of the United States.
Carlson has frequently targeted the FBI, accusing the agency of playing a direct role in undermining political figures and movements that threaten the establishment. In his view, the FBI does not function merely as a law enforcement agency, but as a political tool to protect those in power. One of the most notable examples he cites is the FBI's handling of Donald Trump's presidency. From the beginning, Trump faced an unprecedented level of scrutiny from intelligence agencies, with accusations of Russian collusion dominating headlines for years. Carlson has argued that the FBI worked to undermine Trump's administration, pointing to the Steele dossier and the controversial surveillance of Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. He has also accused the FBI of targeting conservative activists. He suggests that informants played a key role in the plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, an event that was later used to frame right-wing groups as domestic threats. Critics argue that Carlson's claims are misleading, as the FBI's role in investigating political extremism is a long-standing one, but his assertions have found a receptive audience among those who believe federal agencies have become politically weaponized. The NSA Spying Allegations.
No one wants to go on TV and say, the government's spying on me, you sound like a lunatic, except when it's true, and in this case it is true. And of course it's not just this show. They're spying on a lot of people, and they should stop because it's illegal. Yesterday, we had a long conversation with officials at the National Security Agency. We got a statement out of them, and they effectively conceded, yes, they read our emails. They have some justification for it, but it's not justified. It never is, except in cases when national security is threatened, and nothing that we did would ever threaten national security, period.
In June 2021, Tucker Carlson stunned his audience with a striking allegation. The National Security Agency, the NSA, had been monitoring his private communications in an effort to remove him from the airwaves. He claimed that a government whistleblower had provided him with proof that the intelligence agency was spying on him and had plans to leak his private emails to the media in a calculated attempt to discredit him. Carlson described the whistleblower's revelations as deeply troubling, suggesting that the federal government had overstepped its legal bounds to target a journalist for political views. The host claimed the information given to him by the whistleblower included details that no one outside his inner circle could have known. He painted it as part of a broader campaign against dissent, accusing intelligence agencies of actively working to silence voices that questioned the mainstream narrative. The NSA issued an unusual and carefully worded public statement in response, denying that Carlson had ever been a, quote, intended target of surveillance. But the phrasing left room for interpretation. Critics pointed out that even if Carlson was not officially a designated target, his communications could have been collected through incidental surveillance, if, for example, he had been in contact with someone the agency was actively monitoring. Carlson seized on the ambiguity, arguing that intelligence agencies often operate in legal gray areas to justify actions they would otherwise be unable to take directly. The deep state's influence on media.
Trump was onto this, actually, from the beginning. He couldn't really explain it, but he could smell it, which is his one great talent. And he was right. Of course, he was attacked mercilessly for suggesting the so-called intel community might not be on the level. How dare he do that, they yelped on CNN. They're public servants. They dedicated their lives to keeping you safe, blah, 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 blah. Actually, they're just people. Some of them are great people. Some of them are rotten and unethical. Some would gladly use leaks, deception, and innuendo to reverse the results of an election. Most people understand this, and that's why the phrase deep state is suddenly part of the public conversation.
Tucker Carlson has long argued that mainstream media serves the establishment rather than acting as an independent watchdog, working closely with intelligence agencies to shape public perception. He claimed the CIA, FBI, and NSA influence news coverage to advance their own interests while silencing dissent. Carlson points to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN as having deep ties to intelligence agencies, drawing parallels to the CIA's Cold War-era Operation Mockingbird, which allegedly recruited journalists to spread propaganda. He suggests similar relationships persist today. He's accused media outlets of selectively covering or suppressing stories based on political interests, citing the Hunter Biden laptop scandal as an example. He argues that intelligence officials discredited the story to protect Joe Biden's campaign, demonstrating how media and government manipulate public perception. The Ukraine conflict narrative.
If the war in Ukraine continues, we will lose no matter how it ends. The world order is being reshuffled as we watch, and by the time it's over, the U.S. will no longer be at the top of the deck. That is very obvious to the rest of the world. But what's fascinating is how few Americans seem to understand what's happening or its consequences. But how would they know? No one in American politics or media will tell them the truth.
Carlson has been a vocal critic of U.S. involvement in the Ukraine conflict, arguing that the deep state has shaped the narrative to justify American intervention. He suggests the war is less about Ukraine's sovereignty and more about Washington's geopolitical interests. From the start, Carlson questioned why billions in taxpayer dollars were sent to Ukraine while domestic issues like crime and inflation remained unresolved. He claims the Biden administration and foreign policy elites are using Ukraine as a proxy war to weaken Russia, benefiting defense contractors and the military-industrial complex. He's also criticized Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, portraying him as a Western puppet and questioning the U.S.'s support for him. He has further suggested that intelligence agencies control the war's narratives, with media and social platforms suppressing dissenting views on NATO's role and U.S. sanctions. While critics accuse him of simply echoing Kremlin talking points, Carlson insists he's exposing the dangers of unchecked U.S. intervention abroad. Now it's time to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Tucker Carlson's theories about the deep state? Let us know in the comments section below.